Hello, friends. Welcome to the very first episode of the Edge City podcast. My name is Timour, and we're going to use this series to explore the ideas and projects that are pushing at the edges of tech, science, and society. By the end of every episode, you'll have a clear understanding of an important innovation that's set to shape the world in the years to come. Today, we have the perfect guests to kick off this series. I'm joined by Devon Zuegel and Janine to discuss Edge Esmeralda, which was a pop-up village experiment that we organized earlier this year. We'll explore the inspiration for Edge Esmeralda, the highlights, some of the challenges, and the broader implications of these types of experiments for society. Just to briefly set the stage with quick backgrounds, Devon is an amazing writer. She has a background as a software engineer, but has always been interested in cities and is now working on a new town project called Esmeralda, which you will hear her describe. Janine is my co-founder at Edge City. She led the grants program at Gitcoin and most recently was a co-creator of Zuzalu, which she unpacks as well. With that, let's get to it.
I'd love to start with, how do you each describe what you do these days? Like if you meet someone new and they ask you what you're up to, how do you answer? And Devon, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, so I'm building a permanent new village for families called Esmeralda, and it's going to be a cross between the urbanism of an Italian hill town with the programming and events of something like a college campus or a family summer camp, except it's all year round. And Edge Esmeralda this June was a prototype of the kind of community that we are building, and I felt very lucky to get to work with Janine, Timour, and the whole Edge City team to make it happen.
And what about you, Janine?
Well, Timour, you know pretty well that when I introduce myself to people at the moment, I say that I'm building Edge City. I'm one of the co-founders with Timour Kosters. We're focused on building these temporary campuses that we're calling Popup villages that we're hosting across the globe. And the aim is to bring together 200 to 500 amazing humans across the frontiers of tech, science, and society to think about what it looks like to share and experiment with new ideas, new technology, building new culture, and all of it being dedicated to accelerating human flourishing. We were lucky enough to partner with Devon in building Edge Esmeralda as this sort of pre-concept to what could be possible at Esmeralda in the future.
Yeah, and maybe just to set the scene and give some context, what exactly was Edge Esmeralda? Maybe Janine, you can just kind of keep riffing on that.
Yeah, so Edge Esmeralda was a month-long pop-up village that we hosted in Healdsburg, California back in June. It feels like a lifetime ago, and the month itself felt like a year. I'm sure Devon could agree with me.
A very fun year. Also very full of things.
And essentially, the focus was around bringing together multiple generations. So we brought together families, we had some locals from the town that were retired, and ultimately built this month-long festival of ideas and building those ideas into real-life projects where people on a day-to-day basis were living their healthiest life. We tried to call it. So we had people running in the morning with one another, doing cold plunges and saunas, then going into a day of work, followed by a shared community dinner. And in the evening, we would have a number of different sessions across many different themes, all the way from hard tech to the cities of tomorrow and looking at health and biotech and longevity. So it really hit this range of intellectual curiosities that people could go down rabbit holes in.
Devon, any other thoughts?
Yeah, the way I like to think about it is kind of like it's the best parts of living in a small town and the best parts of living in a city where, you know, it had this small town feel where everyone would gather around the plaza in the morning. You'd like cross paths with someone as you're getting your morning coffee or buying like bread in the morning. But at the same time, it was full of interesting activities and you're learning things all the time. There was always something to do. And I think one of the sources of inspiration that we had was like college campuses, where a lot of people feel like college is one of the happiest times of their life. And our view of why that is because it's a place where you're usually like walking and biking around and seeing your friends. There's interesting things to do all the time. You're learning and growing as a person, and you're doing it with other people around you. And so we were kind of trying to recreate that like college experience, except for people of all generations, and in particular for families.
Totally. I think a really interesting aspect of it was that a lot of people actually came in almost expecting a conference, and that's not a word that we even came close to using just now in the description, and it didn't feel like that on the ground, which I thought was interesting, even though we did have these themes that we talked about around frontier technologies, hard tech, health, AI, crypto, etc. So that was a really interesting aspect for me. It kind of felt like for the people that work in those industries and also for their families and friends, etc., this kind of felt just what life could just be like, you know? And I think something that's interesting to touch on here is potentially the historical context here, and then just in general, the inspiration. You know, when we're creating a novel, new environment like this, it's interesting to think about where did this actually come from? And maybe Devon, would love to hear your thoughts on what the inspiration was for you for Esmeralda, potentially initially, and then also, you know, this event.
Yeah. So one thing I loved about working on this is that the Edge City team and then also Esmeralda on my side of things, we both came with our own inspirations that were different, but also really complementary. So from my perspective, a huge inspiration was a small town that I grew up going to every summer called Chautauqua. My grandmother lives in Chautauqua, and it's this really charming small town in Western New York that has about 8,000 people. And in the summers, they have 9 weeks of events. They have lectures and workshops and performances. And, you know, I remember when I was 8 years old, Jane Goodall came and talked about chimpanzees, and that blew my mind. And, you know, the Beach Boys came and performed, and they have their own like symphony orchestra, even though they're this tiny town in the middle of rural New York. To me, Chautauqua was just so normal growing up. And it's actually been interesting trying to explain Edge Esmeralda to people and the future plans for Esmeralda, the permanent community that I'm building, because I think a lot of people are like, I don't really understand what it is. And to me, it feels like such a natural thing because I grew up going to a place just like this as a kid. So it's been really fun to have that comparison point, but also like a challenge because not everybody's been to Chautauqua. So being able to explain sort of what it is. But I think that was one of the reasons why I enjoyed so much actually doing Edge Esmeralda with you guys, because it gave me a way to point at something very concrete to people and say, you know, this Esmeralda thing that I'm building, well, here's like a little prototype. And the things you liked about this, that's what you're going to like about the permanent place once it's fully built.
Yeah, honestly, learning about Chautauqua was such a surreal moment for me early on in our conversations because it just felt like this is exactly how I want to raise my kids, right? You know, a month or two a year. I'm actually curious, maybe if you could just touch on how did it start? Did it just kind of spontaneously come out of nowhere, or what was the context?
Actually, it's funny you ask that because my grandma just sent me this adorable little like pamphlet called Chautauqua, which is adorable. And Chautauqua was founded 150 years ago. This is actually its 150th anniversary. And it was founded really just as a summer camp for families where they'd go to the lake Chautauqua and set up tents for, I think it was 2 weeks initially. And they had such a good time learning from each other and spending time together and enjoying like lake activities that they just kept coming back. And ultimately they ended up putting down roots and building homes and turning it into a permanent town. And, you know, early on, some of the early attendees of Chautauqua were people like Thomas Edison and Lewis Miller and Harvey Firestone and Henry Ford. They would go to Chautauqua with their families, and they saw it as a place where they could learn and be around other people who valued learning, but also something that could include the entire family, as opposed to, you know, the boardrooms of the Ford Motor Company. Like, it's probably not super kid friendly, but if you can bring your kids to this place, then they get a little bit of the taste of what it looks like to learn new things and build things. So yeah. Chautauqua, I could talk about Chautauqua endlessly. You know, there's this whole little booklet that has a lot of good stuff in it. So
should we start reading it?
It's really good. I read it yesterday over my morning tea.
So one final thought on that. One thing that really stood out to me when I started reading more about it is that it didn't just stay in this one place, right? And just in summers. It almost became a noun, like a thing that people did, and it spread all over the US, right? Am I getting that right? Like 500 different towns had their own Chautauquas.
There's something called traveling Chautauquas, because one of the big things that Chautauqua did was it has actually the oldest continuous book club in America. It was this sort of like national book club where there's like a reading list. And it was a way for people to get access to books in a time when it was actually really challenging to get books. And some of the little rural towns around America that were part of the Chautauqua Book Club ended up being like, hey, why don't we do our own Chautauquas here? Like we can't make it all the way to New York. It's, we're in Idaho or, or somewhere like that. But why don't we pop up our own Chautauqua? And then there were also these sort of like traveling Chautauquas that were like circuses almost. They weren't circuses, like they didn't have an elephant or something, but they were like traveling circuses in that same way, where they would put up a tent and someone like Mark Twain would, give a talk or read something from his most recent book. So that was a really important piece, was sort of, yes, there's this like core Chautauqua in Western New York, but then they also went around like spreading the seeds of the idea across the whole country.
I think this is really important. Actually, something Janine and I talk about a lot, and Janine would love for you to touch on this, but like creating a piece of culture in one place and then have it actually spread wider. So yeah, Janine, would love to hear about your inspiration and what you brought into this.
Yeah, and quickly just to touch on like Devon talking about like Chautauqua and traveling Chautauquas, it really feels like similar to Esmeralda and Edge City in a way, where Edge City has actually in the current form been almost like the traveling Chautauqua, whereas Esmeralda is more akin to like building Chautauqua in itself. And what I'm fascinated by is like us building these things in parallel versus having one thing happen first and then taking it elsewhere, and seeing if we can take this model and almost, move it at a different crazy, like techno optimistic future that we're painting. But kind of Devon going down the path of sort of like her history and like where so much of like what Esmeralda is going to be has come from with this inspiration of Chautauqua. I've got sort of two areas to pull from. One more recently, which was Zuzalu, and then actually sort of going all the way back to growing up. And I'll start with sort of growing up. I grew up in South Africa, and like my sense of community was so rooted in culture there, where all of my family and my family friends' doors were open at any given time for, families to seamlessly move through one another's homes. I just remembered always going home with different friends and, spending the afternoons doing homework at their homes or playing sport and play group at a different friend. Like my mom had a babysitting group growing up, so I never had like an outside babysitter. It was always from the group of families that we would be babysat by. So it was this like deep sense of community and learning from many different adults at any given time. And fast forward, I came over to the States for college, and I was so shocked by how the nuclear family was such a whole thing in the US, and there wasn't the sense of like community as like a family friend ecosystem. I remember going home to a friend's house for Thanksgiving, and it was like crazy that they had someone from, but that wasn't part of their core family there for Thanksgiving. It was this like unheard of thing, whereas that was like very standard in South Africa with going home with friends for Christmas or for a holiday of sorts. So that really shaped like being on this quest when I got to the US of like, how do I find community and how do I dive into different subcultures? And I spent time living in co-ops. I traveled across Europe working at a art residency, and then for this like festival, a yoga festival, and then staying in this like yoga commune of sorts for a while, and just recognizing the value of community around these subcultures that were developed to push forward that subculture in some capacity. And then after learning from so many other subcultures, I ended up starting to experiment with like, what does it look like to build my own co-living spaces? We moved between mountain towns when I was in my early 20s and lived with friends. We had about 30 friends living together across mountain towns during COVID. And during that time, I just saw how the love of a specific shared idea or project, which in our case was biking and spending time outside, how it really accelerated certain people's careers in that field. We had someone who started in the group who wasn't a professional cyclist, and she ended her time in COVID being like the absolute top cyclist in the US. And it was this kind of interesting thing of like, oh, you can actually accelerate progress in a given field when you bring people together in close proximity with a shared love and passion for something specific. And started to think about like, what does that look like at scale. We'd done this with like 30 people, but like, how do you grow that? And started doing these weekend retreats where we would have like 150 people come together around just play. Like the idea was like, if you get people together for play, you can reduce the idea of bringing anything serious to the table. And play was such a core piece of these adult summer camps that I started putting together in Austin, Texas, where after this traveling commune lifestyle, my husband and I settled. And it was this real pivotal moment of like, you can really bring together large number of people around shared ideas, around fun, around play, and get them to just like open their minds and be so much more curious. And that really led me to thinking, how can technology help create like coordination around things like this so that it's not just over a weekend, but it's over a longer term period. And there must be mechanisms out there that work. And that had me sort of dive into crypto and the Ethereum ecosystem. And I worked at a place called Gitcoin, where it was focused on funding public goods and this idea of public goods that we'd almost lost in a lot of ways, like religious centers, community centers are in a way a public good that have just sort of fallen by the wayside in our current generation. And I see the technology is almost taking that place in the future. And in doing so, I got connected with Connected, who's the founder of Ethereum, and a number of different people in the Ethereum ecosystem that had this idea of doing something called a pop-up city. It was this totally new concept of bringing about 150 people together for a full 2-month period. And we did that in Montenegro last year in 2023. Ultimately, from that, there was just so many crazy learnings of bringing people together in close proximity that have a shared value of just curiosity and kindness and an openness to learn and create and build could unlock so much more than one would expect if you just had people all over the world doing so remotely online. And that has been sort of this inspiration of a seed of an idea that was planted that we have taken forward with Edge City and what we're building, these month-long to 2-month-long periods of bringing people together in close proximity around shared ideas and values.
Yeah, amazing. Great description. So coming back to Edge Esmeralda, I'd love to touch on maybe one way to enter this would be just to hear some of the highlights that you guys had and maybe a couple of things that you feel like we should 100% definitely do next time. Devon, curious if you have thoughts there.
Yeah, and there were so many highlights. It's honestly, it was only 30 days, but as Janine said, it like felt like a year worth of exciting stuff. But I think one that really jumps out to me is that Nick Foley and Anson Yu, who are two attendees, they took it upon themselves to pull together a crew and build a solar A-frame, which was like, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's like 2 solar panels like put up together like this, and then it creates this like little shelter that you can camp in. And they started it not even in the first week of Edge Esmeralda. I think they started it in the second week, and they ended up like working their butts off so that by the last week of the month, everyone could come up there. There was this really cool Golden Future night market, which was all solar powered and like had delicious food that people made. We had our closing ceremony up there. And the thing I love about that, I mean, honestly, I love everything about it, but I think I love that they took it upon themselves to do something really cool. We didn't tell them to do it. Like I think when Nick first suggested it to me, I was like, cool, that sounds great. Like, how can we be helpful? But really, like, they just did it all themselves, and just bringing their creativity and building something and actually like using the month to do something that they might not have otherwise done. Nick had said that he'd been meaning to do a project like this for a really long time, and he felt like Edge Esmeralda was the right container for it. And it was sort of asking to be done. And he ended up also getting a lot of help from people, which accelerated happening. And Anson brought a huge crew of people up to help him out. So that I love. And I'd love to see them build even more cool stuff. I'd love other people to build cool stuff. That doesn't necessarily have to be a physical like structure like what they did. It could take so many different forms. But the idea of using the month as a container to actually put something together and build it. I mean, I'm thinking, next week is Burning Man. And so many people spend like their entire year planning for Burning Man, putting together an awesome art car, creating something. And I think the flavor of what people do for Burning Man is a little different than what we're doing. So it's not like if you want to bring an art car to Edge Esmeralda, we are not going to say no. But like
Healdsburg might.
Yeah, Healdsburg might not be so into that. but I think the ethos of like taking it upon yourself to be like, what can I contribute here? What can I build? And what is, not only can I contribute, but what can I learn from the experience and get out of it, and use this as an excuse to make something really cool.
Do you feel like as an organizer now, let's say thinking about next year, spoiler alert, there is a next year, we'll talk more about it. But as an organizer, do you feel like there's something that we can distill there in terms of, you know, we're not going to say, okay, next year we have to have an A-frame again, that we have to recreate this, but what is the principle we can take into the organization that allows things like that to flourish?
I think there's probably a few. One that jumps to mind is like, think about a prompt for people could be like to think about what's something that you've always wanted to do, but you just haven't like set aside the time to do it, or you haven't had the support, or maybe it would be helpful to have a few extra hands, and like you don't usually have a few extra hands lying around. So you can get some other people to help you out with it. Or another prompt could be like, what's a skill that you want to learn? Is there someone else who's attending who knows that skill, who you could work on with them and build it? I think another one is like doing things that are physical is especially cool. Like, love every single session that we did, like all of the talks and things. But I think that because we have this long-term period of an entire month, as opposed to just like a weekend, like most events are, it's like, what could you actually go and build and put together so that other people can experience it, as opposed to just sort of conceptually talking about ideas. Like, how do you go out and execute on it? And maybe that's a physical object or structure, or maybe it's an essay that you wanted to write with somebody. So I think those are a few prompts that come to mind that I think could get people's juices flowing about what to do next time.
Yeah. I also love the idea of bringing like this concept of, you know, what Nick was able to do was he had an idea and he rallied a whole little ecosystem at Edge Esmeralda around him. Like, he had, you know, like 6 people that were going out on a regular basis and being in the like scorching hot sun, working, moving logs and twigs, and then putting up these A-frames, while there was so much going on like quote unquote campus. And seeing that like dedication and that like excitement around this little ecosystem of builders was something beautiful, and seeing like more of those types of collaborations would be super cool.
Another component I loved about that project was that they also worked with locals. So there are these lovely people who own a formerly burned redwood forest up in the hills of Healdsburg, and Nick got a hold of them actually through LinkedIn, of all random places. That's a whole nother story that I should let Nick tell how he got a hold of them. But it was this collaboration. These people are foresters who've been caring for this forest for a very long time. It was this really cool collaboration where it was a combination of their knowledge of the forest and their willingness to try something new, and Nick's ability to build something, and Anzin's ability to bring a bunch of people along, that all came together. And I think one of our hopes and dreams for Edge Esmeralda is for it to be something that includes Healdsburg locals and Sonoma County locals too, which I think we achieved last year, and I think we could do even more of in the future.
Yeah. Any other highlights, Janine, that come to mind?
So many. 2 that I want to bring up. One is around families. The idea of actually like bringing in families. And I remember early on when we were all, you know, pretty strapped, like our team was 4 people until a month before the event. And we're like, let's make sure we get as many families. And everyone was like, okay, what do we actually do when do we have kids? Like, what's going to happen? And just saying yes and sort of seeing like what could be possible, I think was incredible, because we ended up having 40 kids coming out over the time, and seeing kids being integrated into the environment that was being built, seeing them on the green, and, you know, kids playing together and families getting to know one another, seeing them attend the dinners. We had Allison, who's also on our team, her 2-year-old joined, who was extremely shy on arrival. She would look at anyone and say, shy. Allison kept being like, oh my goodness, is my kid going to be social by the end of this? And that was her goal, was like getting Winnie to be friendly with people after. And when by the end was walking around with lollipops at our final sports day, and she was like, share, share. And it was really cool to see her going from shy to share over the course of the month. And I think what I really want to keep seeing more of is that it's not just about bringing families in and then repeating what we have in our current environments of like, kids now go to school, they stay separated, the retired go and stay in their retired homes, and we keep everything segregated. I think what was like beautiful about Edge Esmeralda, which is a thread that I want to keep pushing on from our end, is this idea of like creating environments that welcome in and take both kids and the elderly seriously, and recognize that each person has such a valuable contribution piece that they can bring to the table. And I think we were just at the beginning of that and making steps towards like, what does it look like for kids to give, workshops? What does it look like for some of the different adults to instead giving a presentation to adults about neurotech? What does it look like to give it to kids? And us sort of just like creating that environment over the long term. The other that I wanted to touch on, actually, Devon, do you have something to jump in on?
I think actually we may have had 80 kids, not just 40, if I remember correctly. I might have that number wrong.
But... Look, I'm looking at it now. You're absolutely correct. That's crazy. Yeah. That is wild.
But we'd love to have even more next year. I mean, 80 out of like over a bit over 1,000 is good, but we'd love to have even more kids and more families.
Totally. And the other piece that I loved, and I'm sure both of you would agree, were the Sunday dinners. I think getting everyone together on a Sunday, church kind of did that in the past, and I didn't realize like how much I would just absolutely adore having a routine like this of bringing people together, touching on like, what are we doing together? What has been done this week? What is possible in the week ahead? Like, how can we do more? How can we be excited and connected? Super special. And one thing we did that I would love to figure out, like, how do we keep progressing? Making sure that there was some sort of like social facilitation that happened to get people on the same page and connected, and meeting 2 to 3 new people on arrival on Sunday. So we had a lot of people that would come in for the week, but then we had about 150 people that were there the whole month. And those 150 people became like really important stewards of the culture and the community moving forward. If anything, what I would love to push on for next year is make it potentially like mandatory, or at least encouraged, that people who are coming only for a week or 2 weeks show up on a Sunday and get there before Sunday dinner, because of the importance of setting the scene for the week ahead.
I think something that's really interesting to me is that we had some of the world's leading tech builders, scientists, futurists there. And one thing that struck me was that, one, it was just so cool to have kids around in that environment. I think it actually creates a very different context for those kinds of conversations, because usually the conferences where these folks hang out with their peers are very focused, very short usually, and very comparatively, and don't have toddlers running around saying shy or share with lollipops. And I think it just creates a very different feeling when you're thinking about the future, to be like, wait, these are the people we're building this for, we're thinking about this for. I think this and some of the other things that you both just said really touches on this idea of social technologies, where we are a community of tech folks and science folks, and we're thinking often about how to push society forward. But for the last, 10, 20 minutes, we've been talking about community dinners and being outside and having kids around and health. And it's interesting that we're going back to those fundamental, fairly obvious truths as what we can actually do to push society forwards. Yeah. Interesting. I'd love to touch on some of the learnings that came out of Edge Esmeralda, things that we think we could have done better, or things that maybe didn't go as planned, or what we've learned from those experiences.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that some people who attended had a hard time with was sort of orienting themselves when they first arrived and understanding what it was. I think from our perspective as the organizers, it was like kind of obvious how everything was going to work, because we'd been spending the last months, thinking about nothing else. But I think for some of the folks who arrived, especially the ones who arrived in the middle of the week when there was less like structure I think they kind of weren't entirely sure where to go or where to find people and so on. And people ended up figuring it out. It seemed that we want people to feel oriented from day one so that they understand sort of exactly how they fit into this. And that understanding will evolve over time, but feeling sort of like there's some security there. And honestly, I think just even understanding what the event is. One thing I found myself saying a lot this month was, if you had never heard of a college campus before and you had no idea how it operated, it would actually be kind of hard to explain like what exactly is going on, sort of the level of because it's an ecosystem. It's not one like linear thing. There's a ton of things going on all at once. And so I think, helping people get oriented. And one thing that we will have the wind at our backs for this next time is now 1,300 people have attended Edge Esmeralda, and so they can explain it to the next person. And when those people come back, they no longer will be confused like from the previous year. I think just like that orienting and giving people slightly more organized like moments to get oriented in the space.
Yeah, I think the piece to continue working on is like, how can people get activated earlier versus only when they arrive? So like, what can we do as a group? Like what, Devon was mentioning around like Burning Man, so many people like prep the whole year to build something there. And something we're excited about with Edge City is being able to continue some of the threads that we saw at Edge Esmeralda, the other pop-up villages that we're doing, like in Thailand. We'll continue some of the experimentation with the community currency that we had with Zupass and this identity layer. And the hope is by, Edge Esmeralda, we've both got like people who have learned from other Edge City experiences, but then also are thinking about it over the next year. Like, how can I expand the project that I worked on? Or what did I not see last year that I want to contribute to this year that's going to make it so much more amazing for everyone else? And that's not just me being like, well, it's not about us. It's about like everyone else helping build it. But it really does take a village to build something incredible and different together.
One other learning and one other thing that I'd love to see evolve next year is having even more things for kids and for families. I think this year it was really amazing to see how the first people who bought tickets and who went in were actually families with kids, because they were like, it was typically people who they love learning, they love building things, and they have a great community of people who do that as adults, but they always feel like their family life and their creative life have this chasm between them and they're really separate. And so a lot of parents told us that this felt like something that they'd been hoping for a really long time. And a lot of them said like, simply by inviting families, I feel like you already like nailed it. But I think we could do a lot more to support that use case and create more cool programming for kids, help people also find friends of the similar ages and similar interests. Like some of the highlights for me were when kids of in like similar age ranges found each other and ended up hanging out for the rest of the time that they were at Edge Esmeralda. And I think we, the organizers, could do a lot more to enable that kind of, connection between the kids.
Yeah, totally.
And similar to that point, I think another area that, we wanted to push on was health. And I think we did a good job of creating these healthy dinners, and those were wonderful. And like, we had a number of people being like, wow, it's just like nice that, it's not just typical conference food. But I really want to expand on like, we did blood tests, but not everyone did the blood tests. We had some people working out in the morning. We had some people doing cold plunges. But like, how can we push the bounds of like, what does it take to build a healthy city? And both investing in Healdsburg and helping them just like be educated about reducing seed oils in the town, as well as having cleaner water sources and just doing more around activities in the morning, as well as healthy activities in the evening, or even changing the light bulbs, like what we learned from Andy Bromberg at the Everything is Killing Us lecture, how light bulbs flicker so much and affect us. There's just interesting health elements that I'd love to pull on.
One of the important things with these gatherings is the engagement of the local community, and I'm curious, how did Edge Esmeralda engage with and potentially even impact the local community, and maybe what learnings are there for future events there as well? Devon?
Well, first I should say that in the end, I was really, really happy with how it all came together, and we ended up connecting with the local community. And I think that many of them would say the same. I will say, like, initially they were really skeptical. When we first announced it several months before the event took place, we said, we're bringing this to your town. We made a point of trying to give them advance notice so that they could have a heads up. And frankly, there was a lot of skepticism. I think they were not really sure what it was that we were bringing to their small town. And we got a lot of really good questions about, like, what is it that you're doing? How many people will there be? How's it going to impact us? And so we decided that we wanted to really lean into some relationships that we already had in Healdsburg. Janine has this amazing friendship with Steve and Susan Vargas, who Steve is the local doctor in town, so he knows a ton of people. Janine's been going to their house for Thanksgiving for many years, and a bunch of other people that we know throughout town who encouraged us to host it in Healdsburg. And so we tapped into that network and said, hey, please introduce us to everyone in town that you can. We want to talk to them. We want to understand their concerns. We want to include them in what's happening. And sort of bit by bit, we ended up talking to ultimately hundreds of people. We had a goal of talking to at least one local per day as part of our team leading up to the event. And I think overall ended up getting people really excited about it. Some of the people who initially were some of the biggest skeptics actually ended up attending the most sessions of anybody, including like the out-of-towners. And some of them ended up being great collaborators on projects. And we built a really positive relationship with the city. We made a point of going to like the city council meeting before the event started and presenting about what we were doing, giving them a heads up. We became members of the local chamber of commerce. We had a local advisory panel of people that we connected with who could give us sort of local perspectives about what it was that might create problems for the town or might be cool opportunities. We also gave like very heavily discounted tickets to Sonoma County locals. So in the end, I think it actually ended up being really positive and almost made the relationship like stronger because up front there was so much skepticism. We then invested a lot in making sure that people understood what was going on. So I feel like I personally learned a lot through the experience, and we are really excited about investing in the Healdsburg community in the long term and getting to know these people better and finding even cooler opportunities for collaboration next year.
Yeah, amazing. And on that note, next year, by the time that this podcast is released, we will have already shared a save the date and an announcement for Edge Esmeralda 2025. The dates will be May 24th to June 21st. We're all incredibly excited for it. I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on what people can expect next year, and just starting to get excited about it.
I think one thing we'd love to encourage is for people to come longer. We ended up announcing Edge Esmeralda just a few months before it happened, and we were thrilled that 1,300 people took us up on it. That was amazing. And I think a lot of people who attended, we had, I think, about 150 people who came for the entire month, which was amazing. But for people who came for much shorter periods of time, a lot of them said, man, I wish that I had been here longer because I feel like I can't, get the full experience. And a big part of the ethos is about getting to know people and building trusting relationships so you can do cool things together. And so our hope is that by announcing it earlier this year, it gives people more of an opportunity to plan around that. And so we strongly encourage you to come as long as you can. I really feel like a week minimum is like what you need, but the longer the better, because these relationships are things that grow and compound over time.
Any other thoughts, Janine? Anything you're particularly excited about, aside from the fact that we are now probably 6 months more ahead of schedule than we were last time?
I feel so prepared.
Just huge.
I feel like there's so much excitement for next year already. Like we've had a lot of people reach out about and get excited. Honestly, kind of to the point of what does it look like to prepare ahead? Like what does it actually look like to start planning? And if anyone listening is really excited about the idea of running a track, like what we did with Eli's Hard Tech Unconference on a weekend, or what we did with sort of Laura Deming's longevity workshop weekend. Like if someone's excited about some project at the frontier of their industry, or pulling on a thread of research that they've seen in the past that they want to try something new around, like if you're excited, like reach out to us now, and let's see what we can do to start getting ahead of things and like building a program together around your topic, because I think that's going to be super impactful to what we do on the ground.
And one prompt for thinking about that is like, what are groups of people that you would love to pull together, and you're kind of looking for an excuse to get them in the same room? What are pressing questions that you think that your field should be thinking about, and who should be there to talk about it? So we could put together probably a list of other prompts like that, but hopefully that gets your juices flowing. And we strongly recommend planning sooner rather than later, because it's a lot harder as it gets closer to the date.
Yeah.
Already getting so excited.
It's a great call out. So I would love to finish here with a quick couple of thoughts around long-term visions. So maybe, Devon, would love to start with Esmeralda and what you can share about the project thus far. Esmeralda is the permanent location that we've been alluding to. And maybe you can touch on why this is a big idea and why it could be potentially very impactful.
Since Edge Esmeralda in June, now it's mid-August, and we've had some really exciting updates. We just announced that we have an exclusive option on a piece of property about 15 minutes north of Healdsburg. And so now hopefully the name Edge Esmeralda makes a little bit more sense to everybody. Not only is it a combination of Edge City and Esmeralda, it's also really quite literally at the edge of Esmeralda. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Esmeralda is going to be a permanent little village where we live like this all year round. And being able to experiment and build this community in a place that is so close to where the permanent place is going to be, what has been incredibly powerful. I mean, one of the things that we were able to benefit from was Edge Esmeralda gave us an opportunity to build relationships throughout Sonoma County and invite people in the town that I should mention. The town is called Cloverdale, where we have this option on the property. And we made a point of including the Cloverdale community as much as possible in Edge Esmeralda. In the Cities of Tomorrow track that I hosted in June, I hosted the city manager of Cloverdale along with the city manager of Healdsburg, where they talked about what it's like to run a city in Sonoma County. And it was this great way to come first as a community organizer and second as people who are building buildings and developing a physical community, because at the core, having that software that goes along with the hardware, sort of the culture that goes along with the buildings, that is really a critical piece of creating a new place. And so, yeah, we've been really excited. It's been very busy since Edge Esmeralda ended, and I think it's only going to get busier from here. And I feel very lucky to be getting to do this with you guys.
Yeah, likewise. We feel similarly. And maybe, Janine, just to take us home here, I'd love to hear your take on the vision for Edge City, and maybe we could also tie in the fact that we are doing another pop-up village. This one's going to be happening in Thailand, starting October 10th, going till November 10th. It's called Edge City Lana. It's the next instantiation of our series of gatherings, and I feel like we have learned so much from the Edge Esmeralda experience. I'm excited to take that into this next one and have it inform, the next 10 years. So curious if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah. Well, firstly, working with Devon was a dream. Edge Esmeralda was such an incredible experience. And it was kind of one of those partnerships that you're like, wow, how incredible it is when you have this synergy where the sum is so much greater than the two parts separately. So we're super excited to partner with Esmeralda for the long term and kind of build Edge Esmeralda for as long as we can. What's it going to look like when we're 80? Things could get crazy. And in the meantime, I think it's really shaped what we are thinking about as Edge City. We started as let's just build pop-up villages around the globe and bring together these techno-optimistic, curious minds. What we've really honed in on is this concept of wow, these strong partnerships with people that are building the cities of tomorrow around the globe are so important and impactful, because shaping culture and shaping the future of culture, being this techno-optimistic culture that is celebrating new ideas and celebrating change and the doers and the builders in our society, is something we really want to kind of hone in on and focus around. So partnering with different cities of tomorrow around the globe and helping accelerate their future is something we'd love to be doing. So building this culture around curiosity, kindness, and high agency, and that's a really important piece to it all. To build truly a better future together is what we're hopeful for.
Cool. Well, I think that's a wonderful place to end it. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thanks, Timour.
Thank you,
This was super
Timour.
fun.
Thanks, Devon.